Welcome to Broadway Buzz. I'm Joe Gary, and I am delighted to welcome you to Matilda the Musical. Keep in mind, this is a show that when it opened in London, won 7 Olivier Awards. At that time, well, it's still a record today, it's the most number of awards that any musical has ever received. So it is in the Guinness Book of Records as the most honored English musical. It would come to America several years later, sweep the Tony Awards, and it is now currently on its national tour, and it is also just recently open to rave reviews in Australia. So our little Matilda, who's 5 years old, now belongs to the world. I mean, keep in mind, when Matilda opened in London, all of the critics said that the most diminutive, the shortest, the tiniest, the most petite leading lady in the world was the star of Matilda, and that was true. I want you to take a moment to look up. You know, when we're children, when we're 5 years old, that's all we do. We live in a world of giants, and we look up. I mean, even the doorknob is too high for us to reach. Even the switch for the lights is too high for us to meet. And so when you watch this child, there are 3 young actresses that alternate in the role of Matilda on the road. I've seen all 3 of them. They're all extraordinary. I mean, it's a toss-up about who your favorite would be. I mean, I watch it one night and I say, oh, definitely, that's who it is. And the next night I go, definitely, that's, and so it goes. They're extraordinary children. I mean, keep in mind, you have a young child playing a 5-year-old, and they play it with such honesty, such distinction, such commitment, such tenacity, such a special kind of focus that young children usually don't have. As you know, the attention span of a young child goes like this, and you watch this child who's so committed, who not only has to act her way through this entire show, she has to belt her way through this entire show. She has to dance her way through this entire show. In fact, she carries this entire show on her shoulders. It's an extraordinary achievement. And the children, all of the children who have played it, the ones who played it in London, all of them, there were 4, all of them were honored with a special Olivier Award. The 3 children that played it in New York were all honored also with the Tony Award. And so it goes. It's an astonishing achievement. I mean, even Ethel Merman would be winded by the end of this show, let me tell you. Okay, so let me go back to the beginning. I'll talk a lot about the show in a moment for you, but I would like to go back to the world of Roald Dahl. Of course, he is the author of Matilda, and he's one of the most beloved children's writers in the world. He lived from 1916 to 1990. He would create a large number of brilliant classical tales for children. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, The Twits. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And what's been so extraordinary about his career, keep in mind, he has sold over, listen to this, 200 million books. And children all over the world have fallen in love with the characters and the world of Roald Dahl. But what's happened since then? Almost all of his major stories have been turned into movies. We, of course, remember Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was turned into Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Ironically, a young boy from the Cleveland Playhouse, Peter Ostrom, would play the lead in that movie. When it was over, he was lined up to be, he was this young, beautiful little child. He was lined up to be a movie star for the rest of his life. And he said, thanks, guys, this was a great event, but I'm going to go and be an architect. And so he did, and that ended his film career, but he did it with great distinction. And then, of course, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was, of course, remade with Johnny Depp recently. All of the movies, Matilda was turned into a movie with Danny DeVito, James and the Giant Peach, they've all found a filmic treatment. But what's extraordinary now about the world of Roald Dahl is that they're all being turned into musicals. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory has been playing in London for many years. And they have just announced that production is going to be coming to New York next season. It's going to be totally reimagined using a famous American illusionist to help with the visual fantasy of the story, and a whole lineup of major stars are signing up to be in it. So again, Roald Dahl will, come to Broadway. He also did another work. He took Ian Fleming's story, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and turned it into a movie musical that was enormously popular and successful. That also was turned into a musical that was an enormous success in London. With the success Matilda has had in the US, it's going to open the door to all of these other works being developed. James and the Giant Peach is also in development as a musical. So the world of Roald Dahl, continues long after his death, and long after those 200 million copies of books have been sold. He's still being reimagined in movies, in cartoons, and in musicals. Okay, let me go back to his life, because the autobiography very strongly influences the world of the children's literature that he writes. Roald Dahl was born, as I told you, in 1916 in Wales. His parents were Norwegian, and they had immigrated to the British Isles because they wanted their children to have the best education in the world, and they felt that was the English system of education. Roald Dahl's mother was very deeply Norwegian, and she was a brilliant storyteller, and this is where Roald Dahl would get his great gift of storytelling. When the children were babies, she would wrap them all in bed, she would cuddle in bed with them and tell them incredible stories using all of the old Norwegian tales. And keep in mind, the Norwegian mythology for children's literature is very dark, very sinister. There are lots of ghosts, demons, and of course the big word is troll. There were trolls everywhere, good trolls, bad trolls. They were under the bed, in the closet. They were everywhere you could imagine. And it added to this phenomenal imagination he would have. So that world of the dark side of fairy tales would very strongly impact Roald Dahl. You'll see it, of course, in the Matilda story. When I talk about it and articulate it, you'll see what I mean. So that would very strongly influence him. When he was 3 years old, tragedy would strike the family. Both his beloved little sister and his father would die in a 3-month period. So Roald Dahl had this tremendous sense of loss as a young child. And very often he writes about that in his fairy tales, about the idea of how we think of children as being so innocent and so helpless. Roald Dahl has always seen children as being tenacious, strong, powerful. When you see Matilda, I mean, in the story you're going to see, if you're not familiar with this story, Matilda has the worst parents. I mean, they are the parents from hell. And Matilda's 5 years old, and she's got to cope with a father whose only mentality is the only thing you need to do is watch the telly. He has a great song where he talks about the brilliance of the telly and how all you ever need to know you can learn on the telly. And then she has this demented mother who only wants to do ballroom dancing and is in love with her instructor, Rudolfo. You'll see a wonderful comic number about it. So, this poor child, 5 years old, has to cope with these impossible parents. And the only hope is, of course, to send her to school where, she'll have a loving environment where she can be nurtured and learn and grow. And she's sent to a school that's a total nightmare, where the headmistress's only claim to fame is that she's an Olympic hammer thrower. And the only thing she really hates in the world, of course, are children. So, isn't this perfect? So all of this world that Roald Dahl will create in Matilda is really out of the old-fashioned English music hall. The exaggerated characters, characters worse than bad. In the story that you see, Miss Trunchbull, who is the headmistress, is played by a man in drag. And that's very typical in the English music hall or in our old vaudeville. You remember Milton Berle, dressing in drag, et cetera. It has that proportion to it. But, this teacher is unbelievable. I mean, Margaret Hamilton would have given her right fang to play this role. It's an extraordinary, wicked role to play. And when you see Matilda, who's this big, stacked against this Amazon woman, and you know that Matilda's going to win, that's what we cheer for through the entire thing. Okay, so Roald Dahl, we use a lot of other things from his life and from his childhood in the telling of his stories. And just let me quickly review some of these with you. Roald Dahl, when he was very young, lived in this Welsh town. And the thing children love most in the world, of course, is candy. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. There's a sequence in that story where children could be turned into fudge. Now, what kind of fantasy is that? So in any case, Roald Dahl's young life, candy was the ultimate objective. And there was, of course, a little candy store in the Welsh town that he grew up in. But sad, of course, by the fact that it was run by this ogre woman who looked like she was a troll out of a Norwegian tale. And every time the children would come in, she'd say, "Keep your grubby little hands off the glass. Don't touch the candy." And I mean, she was a nightmare. And so Roald Dahl, as a young boy, thought he had to set things right. So when she turned her back one time, he took a frog and put it in her candy bowl. So she was so outraged that she went to Roald Dahl's mother and said, "This boy should be put in reform school." Well, he wasn't put in reform school, but he was put in a private school that was very like the school you're going to see in the show tonight, where there was severe corporal punishment, where children were literally caned. The priest who was the head of the school turned out to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. And Roald Dahl said, "So what can I do with religion when I look at the Archbishop of Canterbury and all I think of is my sore bum?" So, from being beaten by the priest for being a naughty little boy. So this will play itself out, his childhood, very strongly in the Matilda story that you see. When Roald Dahl was a young man, he wanted to see the world. And he literally did a hiking trip through Newfoundland. And while he was in America, he got a job with Shell Oil and was stationed in Kenya. And so as a young man, in a period where people didn't really travel to exotic places, he was living for several years in Kenya. And he connected very strongly with the Maasai tribe. And this was a tribe of people that would move their cattle all across Kenya depending on the season and the wet or dry season. And he learned all about the mythology of African fairy tales. And what I want to remind you of in the world of fairy tales, it starts out in an oral tradition, but similar fairy tales exist in every culture. So whether it's Chinese, whether it's Indian, whether it's African, the same tales exist. The tales of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, they find different forms. So Roald Dahl, all of his life, collected these stories and loved the idea of storytelling. He fell in love with flying when he was in Kenya, because he would fly from place to place. He learned to be a sort of bush pilot. The Second World War came along, and he became a very famous Royal Air Force pilot. In his group of fighters, there were 24 men in his squadron. 20 of them died in battle. He was enormously brave and played a very major role in helping Britain keep out the Nazis during the war. At one point, his plane did crash in the Middle East, and he climbed out of the plane, was blinded by the experience, and spent several months. He had a severe concussion. His brain was totally shattered. The skull was totally shattered. And the rest of his life, he would go through 8 spinal surgeries to correct the injuries from that time. But to show you his dark sense of humor, right after that, he published his first children's book. And on the back cover, it said, Roald Dahl was a Royal Air Force pilot. He crashed, totally smashed his skull to bits, and when he woke up, he was a children's writer. That's how he dealt with it. And that's his sense of humor. So keep that in mind as you watch the show. This humor is very dark in this show. His theory was, he said, people, when he first wrote these children's books, sort of complained and said, you write about bodily functions, you write about vulgar things. And he said, look, kids are vulgar little buggers, and they relate to this sort of thing. And so he understood a child's sense of humor. I want you to have a visual sense of him. He was 6'6" tall. Can you imagine him ever getting into a fighter plane? I mean, that was an event to see by itself. He must have been a pretzel by the time they got him in that fighter, in the cockpit. But he was so enormously appealing to children that after these books were published and he would do book tours, et cetera, or read from his books, children were so enamored. He was sort of like an Ichabod Crane. I mean, the 6'6" gangly man who just sort of embraced children and would tell stories. He uses the imagery of giants a great deal in his story. And one of his most famous stories is about a giant, of course. And of course it is Roald Dahl. But in the case of the Matilda story, he is definitely Matilda. Okay, a couple of other things about his life that will impact the work that you're seeing today. He would marry the great American actress Patricia Neal, who was a great stage star and movie star. They would have 5 children. They would live together for 30 years and have a very sad divorce at the end of the 30 years. Very quickly, at the beginning of their marriage, Patricia Neal was such a celebrity, and she was appearing everywhere in the world and winning Academy Awards, and she was an astonishing artist, both on the stage, both in America and in England. She had a very big career on stage and in film. So it was her money that sort of kept them going at the beginning. They would have 5 children. But I want to tell you 2 things about their family life that would impact the dark world of Roald Dahl again in this story. They had a beloved first daughter named Olivia, doted on, loved, adored, this beautiful, magical child, very like the Matilda character you're going to see. And when she was a very young girl, she contracted measles and died of encephalitis. And it was a loss that neither of them ever got over, but Roald Dahl, his whole life would be in mourning for the loss of that child. And he, therefore, all of these great little female characters he creates in his stories are very much tributes to Olivia. Then they were in New York. Patricia Neal was doing a show on Broadway, and the whole family moved to New York while the show was appearing. And the nanny was wheeling their newborn son, Theo, and she stepped off the curb, and a taxi went through a red light, hitting the carriage and brain damaging the child, Theo. In the recovery, the child had fluid on the brain, and they thought the child would be impaired the rest of his life. And Roald Dahl said, "I will not accept this." And this is something that you see in all of his writing. His children always have this capacity of saying, why not? Don't say no. Whatever it is, I can fix. And so, the doctors are saying this child has fluid on the brain. There's really not much we can do. He's going to be an invalid. And Roald Dahl went to one of his friends, who was a famous engineer. By this point, they both had celebrity, both Patricia and Roald Dahl. And he went to this very famous engineer and said, we've got to work out some kind of shunt that we can put in the child's brain that will drain the fluid to another part of the body where the body will absorb the fluid. And so they did. And so over 3,000 children have been saved by this. It's a shunt. The middle name is called Dahl. There are 2 other technical names. I can't remember them. But so this shunt was put into children and saved their lives because he said, don't say no. We can find a solution to it. And he really did. And it's in all the medical records that it is attributed to him. And he created this special little hinge that would create the flow from not going back to the brain. Really extraordinary. And that's always in his stories. He writes about machines and mechanisms and things like that. One other tragedy that happened, at the height of Patricia Neal's career and great success, she had just won the Academy Award, for HUD with Paul Newman. It was the shortest film performance by a leading lady that would win the Academy Award. It was so deeply impressive. If you haven't seen that movie, do. But it's a very short role, but she won the coveted Academy Award for it. But right after that, while she was pregnant with their 5th child, she would have a series of embolisms in the brain that turned into a massive stroke where the response, the medical profession said she would be a vegetable the rest of her life. She'll be able to deliver the baby, but she's substantially a vegetable. And Roald Dahl said, absolutely not. And he took her home from the hospital, and he had physical therapists, vocal therapists, hydrotherapists, neighbors working with her, forcing her to play Scrabble, moving whatever she could move, the one arm she could move, forcing her to engage her mind and muscles and body for 8 hours a day. People who watched it at the time were either amazed by his commitment to doing this or horrified, thinking he was pushing her much too hard. The end result was she was able to have a comeback in her life, and after 2 years of this massive therapy, she would go on to make the movie The Subject Was Roses and once again be nominated for an Academy Award. And she then would spend the rest of her career traveling all over the world, doing a one-man show, etc. Roald Dahl would die in 1990. They divorced in a very acrimonious divorce, and she then would travel on cruise ships, and I, for 10 years, traveled with her from 2000 to 2010, so we became very close friends. I went and stayed in the brilliant house they had in Great Missenden in England that Roald Dahl called the Gypsy House. In the backyard, there's a gypsy carriage that his children played with. The imagery of gypsy is very important to Roald Dahl also. You'll see it very strongly in Matilda. When Matilda, there are two benevolent adults in the story you see. One is the librarian, Miss Phelps, and she wears lots of jewelry and is very sort of exotic, and there's a very strong gypsy influence to her. And Roald Dahl as a child, remember at the end of the First World War, gypsies were dispossessed, and they were people moving all over Europe. They were immigrants. You know, this story of people seeking a homeland is not a new story. It's ancient and biblical. But gypsies would move in caravans looking for homes, and Roald Dahl was always very drawn to them and drawn to their mystery, their mysticism, their stories, their wonderful mythology, and he would use all of this in his stories. And you see Miss Phelps wonderfully developed in that tradition in this story that you see. Okay, so now here we are. Roald Dahl would go on and have this tremendous success making all these great children's stories. So Matilda is optioned for a musical in the year 2006. The people optioning it are the Royal Shakespeare Company. Those of you know Shakespeare's 400th anniversary is this year. There's an enormous amount of attention going to Stratford-upon-Avon, which is his home, and it is the home of the Royal Shakespeare Company, who has 3 magnificent theaters there. They're expecting the largest tourist influx this summer that they've ever had at Stratford. And the end result is the Royal Shakespeare Company, which has been doing the definitive interpretations of Shakespeare for countless years, but they also take modern works and develop it. They were the ones who developed Les Miserables. They were the ones who developed Nicholas Nickleby, which was a massive picaresque novel by Charles Dickens that was turned into an 8.5-hour play. They would develop that and send it out in the world where it would become enormously successful. Same thing is true then, of course, with what they do with Matilda. In 2006, they optioned the rights to it. They very smartly put together a very interesting crew of people to develop the story. First of all, there is Dennis Kelly. And Dennis Kelly is an English playwright. You wouldn't necessarily know him. I've seen a lot of his works in my years of working and living in England. But he writes very dark comedies. And he's done several television shows that have a very dark edge to them. And so this sort of line between that which is dark and that which is funny is a very fine line, but very much a part of the world of Roald Dahl. And so he was perfect to work on the storyline of the Matilda story. And of course, they had to articulate it in a way that would work in a musical rather than the way it worked in a novel. He would work with a great director, Matthew Warchus. Matthew Warchus has been a great classical director in England, working at the Royal Shakespeare Company, doing a brilliant version of Coriolanus and countless other works, also doing very commercial works like the play Art, and like the play Boeing, Boeing, both played in London, moved to New York. Also, this was also true with God of Carnage, his most recent appearance on Broadway. And so the end result is, this is a director who is both savvy and commercial, working in the commercial theater, but also very articulate and esoteric, working in the classical theater. So he's sort of perfect to guide this project to fruition. They then would hire Tim Minchin. And Tim Minchin is a very interesting composer, lyricist. He's Australian, and he became famous literally by taking a cabaret show that played all over the world that was called The Dark Side. And Tim Minchin writes very commercial music, very pop music. You'll hear it. The music is very delightful. My Mother Thinks I'm a Miracle, the opening number of the show, Naughty, a great song, a whole body of delightful songs, that My Home, delightful songs that you will hear in the show. So on one hand, he has this wonderful commercial ear, but also he has very sort of naughty lyrics that push you, test you, that are funny, that are outrageous, that are apocryphal. So he has a wonderful sense of language and a wonderful sense of music. He is a sort of cabaret kind of performer. When you listen very carefully to this music, I've been going back and hearing it in the car when I come here and when I drive home, and I'm very struck by how much the English music hall influences it. The idea of these little sort of vaudeville tags, stuff that's so of the theater. I mean, this has always been a part of his writing and his music. So he's the perfect person to put together this score. Watch that beautiful song at the opening of the second act. The children are on swings. Every time I see that scene when I drive home through the park, I'm tempted to stop at the first swing set I see. But I don't want to be arrested at 11 o'clock at night in the park singing When I Grow Up. That's the song from the show. But it's a delightful moment in the show and catches the real quality of it. The final thing I really want you to be aware of. The director is so smart in the way he conceived the environments. Everything is very vertical. You see, the first thing you see on stage are a series of little Scrabble tiles, when we used to play Scrabble with letters on it, etc. And it's walls and walls of Scrabble tiles, but they're very vertical. So the first time you see Matilda come out on the stage, this diminutive little creature, she's dwarfed by this incredible vertical environment. And when she goes to the library, it's walls of books that go up so high, your eye is pulled up. And they're so clever in making the giant world of grown-ups versus the intimate small world of children. When you watch the show, what's so clever, all of the children are very realistically developed. You believe all the children. I mean, you're not watching Matilda being a showy little kid tap dancing for you. This is really an actress playing a role. And the children are all so real in the way they relate to one another. The adults are the cartoons. The parents, the Trunchbull, they're right out of Roald Dahl's books, and the cartoons that were drawn, the illustrations that were done. And it's how the children see the adult world. And then there are these two loving people, Miss Honey, who's the great teacher that we all hope we would have in our lifetime. And you fall in love with her, and you fall in love with the librarian as they try to help Matilda on her road to success. So what you're watching is this journey of a child overcoming almost everything, overcoming her family life, overcoming horrific problems at school, and becoming the person she is meant to be. I mean, this is the story of Roald Dahl. It's always about these indomitable children who seem to survive everything. And there's something very uplifting in the telling of this story. So I do hope when you see the show tonight, you're not inclined at the beginning of the second act to run up, push the children off the swings, and swing yourself. But it does remind all of us of the brilliance of childhood and the magic of childhood. So enjoy. Thank you very much.